Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to this session today where we're going to be talking about the Consumer Duty Competency Assessment Tool. So welcome everyone. I am Vanessa Riboloni, Professional Capabilities and Insight Manager, and we are joined by Amanda Knight from Cognisco, and we'll do some introductions in a moment. But beforehand, just cover what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be focusing on what are the expectations of the FCA for firms in light of the consumer duty, especially around culture and behaviours. We're going to be covering some of the insights from research that we've carried out to understand what firms feel in terms of how the consumer duty has impacted their ways of working, and also some insights into kind of the key skills and behaviours that drive good outcomes. And related to that, obviously, the main focus of today is around how can we measure behaviours as opposed to technical skills that we measure through things like qualifications. So the focus of today is very much around assessing behaviours and broader softer skills. And Amanda is going to be talking about the tool in detail and what is the science that underpins and what makes this tool different through what are called situational judgment tests. So moving on, just to introduce myself, as I said, I'm Vanessa Riboloni, Professional Capabilities and Insight Manager. And part of my focus of my research very much over the past 3 or 4 years has focused around understanding what are the competencies, the skills, the behaviours, the knowledge that drive good outcomes, and that includes both behavioural and transferable skills and technical skills needs of the market. So a lot of my research focuses on that. And related to the consumer duty, I've been leading on a few events around gathering and convening market stakeholders, regulators, etc., around some roundtables to really look at kind of the challenges that firms face with the Consumer Duty Board reports, and also to try and drive a bit more of an understanding around the interplay between professional standards, ethics, and the requirements of the duty. And also we've produced a few white papers around how the duty translates into practical steps. So this is a bit of my background and why am I here talking about consumer duty and skills. And I'm going to hand over to Amanda to provide a bit of an introduction on who she is and why she's here.
Thank you, Vanessa. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yes, I'm Amanda Knight, CEO at Cognisco. I've been with Cognisco for about 17 years myself. I started my career as a psychologist, as a traffic psychologist, actually, with Cranfield University. So I have a background in identifying risk, predictors of risk, which led me nicely into this role. But sometimes we're not always talking about risk, we're talking about development opportunities where it's more focused. So my career with Cognisco has been a long and varied one. I haven't always been CEO. This is where I find myself today. But basically we help our customers to identify where training is needed, but also where it's not needed, actually. Let's flip it on its head. So some people don't need training at all, but it's nice that they can evidence that they don't need training. And they might not need training in everything. We'll come back to that later on. So basically, we help organisations to evidence compliance, due diligence to compliance, help evidence to the regulator. And really, that's our background. So more later from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I was just unmuting myself. So moving on, I just want to start with a bit of context and just a bit of a reminder around what the final guidance of the consumer duty, the FCA's final guidance 22/5 says around its expectations, especially where it says that the duty now sets a higher expectation for the standard of care that firms need to give to customers. And the expectation is for that many firms, this will require a significant shift in both culture and behaviours, although many firms will be already on the right track. And culture is quite a slippery concept to define because there's, and the FCA also recognises this, and it's quite evident that there's as many good cultures as organizations, and each organization will have their own values that drive that good culture. But behaviors are a bit more tangible, and behaviors are a bit easier to define. And as I said in the introduction to the session, we've done a lot of research around what good behaviors look like and what are the key behaviors that drive good outcomes, what are the key behaviors that underpin ethical decision making, how you approach your clients, how you interact with your colleagues, and how you apply your technical expertise. So that's what the FCA says, just in terms of the expectations that the FCA has set out on firms, very much, as we'll all know by now, revolve around ensuring that every aspect of the business is customer-centric, that engagement with clients and customers is timely, that they have the right information, that the information is accessible, but that there's also an internal culture of continuous improvement, identifying pitfalls, using feedback to identify where there might be areas for improvement and implementing those improvements to drive good customer outcomes, as well as having accountability at senior level to ensure that these expectations are pervasive across a culture of a firm. And where our research complements this, or where there's a synergy, is around the research that we've done around the individual behaviours. So whereas the FCA sets out standards of expectations to firms, the PFS has very much that focus on the individual behaviour. And our research shows, obviously, that behaviours that drive good outcomes focus on having clear communication, understanding your different audiences to ensure that you communicate at the right time in the right way. Insight and problem solving is so important to be able to analyze the root cause of issues that customers and clients might be experiencing, and then being able to address those issues and being able to evidence what you've done to address any issues. Customer focus as well, having that clear balancing kind of commercial drivers with customer outcomes and inclusivity. Integrity and ethics is a key component part of the duty, because now individuals need to ask themselves, is this the right thing to do, rather than can I do this? And then having the right data and technology skills and adaptability to be able to adapt to changing regulations, market requirements, and customer needs. So this is very much kind of where we align with the FCA in terms of understanding the behaviours that drive good outcomes. I mentioned earlier on that we were going to be talking about some of the research that we've done with members. And one of the things that we asked was, to what extent has the consumer duty impacted your firm? And the research really revealed that many firms, building on, most of the firms actually, building on the treating customers fairly principles, believe that they're already on track and already aligned with the duties expectations on individuals and on firms. However, what was really interesting was that we hear that the duty has really accelerated some changes that in the past had been deprioritized. They knew that they had to be put in place, but other business priorities had overtaken. And what the consumer duty has done is really accelerated that change in those areas. And there's kind of three main areas where we've seen feedback mentioning those changes and that acceleration. The first one is around increased client centricity. And many firms say that they have intensified efforts to understand what clients value, aiming to improve service delivery, refine positive aspects, and address client needs more holistically. And this includes things like simplifying suitability reports, ensuring that the language used is accessible, and making disclosures clearer and more user-friendly. Another area is around internal alignment. And what does this mean? This means that firms now report better team collaboration and meetings where client needs are a key focus. So the customer outcomes are an item on the agenda and something that is discussed, alongside standardized processes and refined job descriptions and job roles and responsibilities that formalize this client-centric approach that is required under the duty and on the treating customers fairly for that matter. And then lastly, an increased focus on understanding and identifying vulnerability. So this is where firms are enhancing skills and procedures to identify and address the needs of clients displaying characteristics of vulnerability. So this was one part of the research that we did around the impact of the duty on firms. And another question that we asked was around what skills do you think are required and necessary for your people, for the advisors to really drive and have make a success of the duty. And here's some examples of the things that came up. So empathy and active listening. And this is about having a really greater consideration of client perspectives to ensure that communications and services are needs-based and add value, as well as the ability to listen attentively to client circumstances, particularly with the aim of detecting vulnerabilities, linking with that vulnerability focus and enhancing those active listening skills. There's also curiosity. So this is all about being inquisitive about how clients experience your services and leveraging feedback and having a willingness to challenge assumptions and seek the root cause of issues. Everything with the aim of driving continuous improvements, which is a key requirement also of the expectations of firms of the FCA. Adaptability, so this is all embracing change with agility and resilience, with practitioners supported in adjusting to new market challenges and evolving client needs. Critical thinking in the context, for example, of these shiny AI tools, so really ensuring that whenever these technologies are used is where your technical expertise come into play to be able to have that human in the loop to identify whether the outputs of AI or any kind of technologies are real and valid. Ethical leadership is not only about role modeling ethical behaviors from a leadership point of view, but it's really ensuring that ethics is part and parcel of business strategy and governance. And finally, moral reasoning. So it's that idea of ensuring that ethics and is at the front of center of decision making. So there's a higher, let's say, cognitive load that goes with the duty, because now you need to really focus on whether this is the right thing to do rather than can I do this from a compliance point of view. So what this emphasizes is that, and reflects, is that behavioral skills are increasingly being understood as essential to good outcomes over and above technical expertise. And this comes very clearly in one of the quotes that came through the research, where one of our respondents said that technical is what we do, the behavioral skills are how we do it. And when working with customers, our focus should always be on the how. So we've got that, the what's so important. It's a fundamental part of being competent and a professional, but most as important as the what is the how you apply that technical expertise and how you make decisions. But also what's important also is knowing the why. So you might be doing all the right things, knowing all the right things, but do you know why you're doing those things? And how can you evidence this? How can firms and how can yourself, how can you evidence that your people have the right behavioral skills? So this is where Proficiency Plus comes in. This consumer duty diagnostic tool that is very much focused on doing behavioral training needs analysis. So what it is a diagnostic tool that is built with the financial advisory audience in mind, very much focusing on assessing the behaviours required to meet the FCA's expectations. So these behaviours that we've talked about through the research. And it's aimed at financial advisory firms, and it's been especially designed for financial planners and paraplanners. And now we'll go into the detail of what the tool is, how it works, and what is the science that underpins this, the tests and the diagnostic, and how it's fueled. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to the expert, to Amanda, and she'll be taking you through some slides.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, so the Proficiency Plus tool is very interesting to help develop this with CII and the PFS as a diagnostic tool. Now, if I just introduce you to some of the methodology around it before I show you some reporting, and then I'll come back to what underpins our methodology afterwards, if that's okay with you guys. So we have a question stem that can often be a scenario in and of itself. Sometimes it's a statement about it. But instead of asking people to pick one correct answer, we're asking them to look at the scenario itself, or the context, the situation. We then present them with a number of responses that we ask them to judge whether that's agree or disagree, or whether they don't know. And I'll come back to don't know, because it is quite important part of the structure of the assessments themselves. So individuals are asked to select whether they agree or disagree with each and every response in our questions, and also asked to indicate their level of confidence in their answer. So I'll go into some... Yes.
Would it be, sorry to interrupt, would it be helpful to read out what an example is, just to read out the STEM and the different scenarios, just to provide a bit more insight into the type of scenarios that we present?
Sure. I mean, this one's all around data and technology. And just to set the scene for the question, there's a STEM. So I'll read this one out there. There continues to be increasing use of data and technology across all aspects of business. Thinking about this use, particularly in relation to customers, clients, consider the following statements about behaviours and actions, and indicate for each one whether you agree or disagree, or I don't know. And then you've got some responses here. So the first one, providing online and digital learning resources is sufficient to ensure that technology is used for the right purposes. Do you agree or disagree? We've selected agree here, and then you're asked to indicate how confident you are. So not particularly high confident, but probably high enough. But the next one, you can see relying on technology is a dependable way to identify vulnerabilities in customers and guarantee the delivery of impartial advice. Now, do you agree or disagree with that? Here we've again selected our choice is disagree, but not so confident in this one. So, you know, you might ask yourself, well, if you're not that confident, why don't you say I don't know? But it's very interesting. We've done some research, and lots of these have gone out to managers, to all sorts of different roles. It's interesting how many people are reluctant to say, I don't know. And I'll come back to that a bit later on. Then you've got a third response here. AI should not be used for data analysis within the business because it is not a secure application. You may agree or disagree with that, and it may depend on your organisation as to whether that's right or wrong. The good thing about this tool is we would play with organisations to say, okay, you have a read through. Is this right or wrong in your reality? Have you introduced AI that is secure and okay to use because you've embedded it in your own systems and it doesn't go outside of that? Then that might be a different response to the question. So these are all tweakable and editable according to the context that they're delivered in, just to clarify that. So what does an individual get as a result of answering those questions in the way that they were asked? They're scored both then on their understanding, whether they agree with the action taken in those scenarios, whether they agree or disagree, whether it's right or wrong. Sometimes the questions are, would you agree that's correct or incorrect, your answer. But what you get as output from that is an individual report. And this is just a snapshot of part of that individual report. Now, individual reports and corporate report samples are available through the link for this website too. So feel free to access those links and get an individual report and a corporate or group level report as well. And that will bring it to life. There's much more detail in the report that we're able to share here. But in essence, what the individual wants to focus on is how did they score in terms of their understanding? And that's represented here by the blue bar, relative to the benchmark that's shown in black. They're also asked, remember, how confident are you in your answer? So your average confidence for that topic is represented in the yellow dot there. And then you get an outcome category as well for each and every topic. Now, the outcome category is determined on how the interaction between the understanding score and the confidence plays out. And I'll come back to how that all works a bit later on as well. So quite useful, high-level feedback for an individual here. What that gives the organisation or the team level reporting, and this is my favourite of all of our reporting because it's what we call the heat map. And the heat map really gives you where your hotspots are initially. Because, you know, why focus people on developing things? If they're dark green, they're confidently knowledgeable. They don't need training in that particular topic. But where I would focus first is where they've got the reds, particularly the dark reds, because these people chose to answer the question. Remember, they have the option to say, I don't know, and maybe they haven't. And they've selected an answer, very highly confident in their answer. And so therefore they come out in the red if they're wrong. So if they're strong but wrong, I call them, they come out in the red. And that's my area for focus initially. So you might want to throw some targeted training at those people in those topics. But as you can see by this matrix, not everyone needs training in everything. So it's much more sensible to identify who needs training and in what before you start sheep dipping everyone into everything. Equally, it gives people an opportunity to highlight where they've got the strengths. They could be championing other people in particular topic areas because they really know it. I mean, look at let's take an example on here. You've got Leilani Garrison here, very strong in topics A, B, and F, and I. Some clear development needs in D and E. So she doesn't need to be trained in everything. This highlights where she should focus first, and she can go and seek out training and take some ownership and responsibility for her own development. And that's the power of this type of heat map. This also helps organisations justify their spend, if you like, where they're going to focus their research or their resources, more to the point, on which topics and to who. So don't waste time and money on training everyone in everything, is really what I would say there. Great evidence-based process. Our research over years has identified that of everyone we've ever assessed in this way, typically we find that 20% of people are optimal. So they've come out in the green, whether it's dark or light green, we're not so worried at the moment, but typically 20% of people are optimal. So in every single topic they were tested on, they scored highly, so demonstrated that they were confidently knowledgeable about all the topics. But then you've got people who have come out, 50% of those who we obsessed have got some knowledge gaps. Not knowledge gaps in everything, but just some, so they can focus. So about half of your people need a bit of training. Then what was really interesting for us over the years is looking at how much risk there was to some organisations where 30% of people had some misunderstanding in their topics or misplaced confidence as well. So that was an interesting statistic for us. And this has played out time and time again. And it's not always as clean as this, 20, 50, 30, but generally speaking, most of the time you can pin it against these kind of statistics. So just to explain how our reporting works when you're scoring understanding and confidence to achieve the outcome categories. You've got confidently knowledgeable people who have achieved the benchmark and the level of confidence, excuse me. That then puts them up in the top right quadrant there. They're confidently knowledgeable. But then you've got people who have scored well, they understood the topic, but they weren't as confident in their answers. So it's no point throwing more training at these people because they know it already. The problem is they just don't know it. They may not be confident. So they might just need a coaching conversation. You know, why weren't you as confident in your answers? Let's look at why you said what you said. You were right, but why weren't you that confident in your answer? So that's a different conversation. It's a different intervention altogether. You don't need to be training those people. Then you've got the people that have come out with yellow for their topic. What yellow means is that they scored probably half their answers right at least, but not enough to achieve the benchmark. And that's regardless of their confidence. They've come out in the yellow category. So they have some misunderstanding or some knowledge gaps to work on, but not the end of the world. Then on the flip side of that, you have people who have scored less than 50%. So they've got more answers wrong than right. And in this particular group, the amber color indicates that they weren't that confident either. So less of a risk, I guess, because they didn't know the answers, but they kind of weren't sure anyway. They indicated with their confidence, actually, I'm not that sure in my answer. Where we do have a focus is where they've chosen to answer the question. Remember, they had the option to say, I don't know, but they didn't. They've chosen to answer the question with a high level of confidence that that was the right answer. And therefore, they've resulted in a misunderstanding category. So the strong but wrongs, high confidence, low understanding is where we have the biggest risk. There's a grey category as well. And this doesn't happen very often, but it happens occasionally, where somebody has chosen to say, I don't know, through the entire topic. So to all questions, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Now, behaviourally to me, that tells me something. So are they resisting taking the test? So there's maybe something attitudinal there, but actually they may genuinely not know, and they're admitting that they don't know. And therefore the outcome category would come out as a grey, unsure of topic. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So coming back to what underpins our methodology. So you've probably all seen multiple choice questionnaires before. They're typically at the end of some training programs, a bit like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Let's select the one we think is right. Problem with multiple choice questions is that they are at best a test of memory recall. Can you remember what the right answer is? I could probably use strategy as well. I could pick the longest response because typically they are usually the right ones because we have to work into the question, you know, what is actually right? So that sometimes takes more words. Yeah, so at the best it's a memory recall, and at worst it's a, you know, probably best guesstimate. So multiple choice questionnaires are really hard to author actually, because coming up with incorrect responses that aren't obviously wrong is quite a challenge in its first place. So you'd eliminate the ones that you know are obviously wrong, and then you would take a guess based on something you remember from learning and still manage to pass this type of test. I may be discrediting it somewhat, but you know, there's a place for it. But when you're trying to identify application of training, application of knowledge, likely behavior, this isn't going to cut it. So what we do is we create something that looks more like this. As I shared on the screen earlier, this looks like this is a scenario. They don't always have to be text, by the way, but what we've done here is we developed them in text to begin with, but there's always the option to add pictures or audio over the top, or even animations or videos. So let's not be bound by that. But at the moment, we've written these in text because there's many of them. It's very varied, and it's a good place to start. So instead of picking the one that you think is correct, this time you are obviously asked to review each and every response. And that's quite a powerful way to look at our assessment, the outcome categories. That's how we get them, because we're not just asking them to think about a very simple question that gives you only one chance to test knowledge. This helps you to assess multiple different behaviours, multiple different insights, multiple different decisions, all based on data and technology, but slightly different variants of data technology. So it gives us many more ways to assess things in that one screen, which is quite powerful. So just to remind you, what we're trying to do here is assess what employees understand, what they don't understand, but more crucially, what they misunderstand. Then we ask them how confident they are in their understanding. And this helps us to decide or have an indicator of the right behaviours and the wrong behaviours that are likely to play out in reality. So this just gives us an indicator of, will they do the right thing and the wrong thing? Do they know, going back to Vanessa's point earlier on, do they know what they should be doing? Do they know how they should be doing it by assessing the process? But what I always like to know, do they know why they should be doing it too? So why do we need to do what we need to do? So if they understand the why, they're much more likely to follow the what and the how. And we can build all of that into our scenarios. I just thought it'd be interesting to share with you an example of a project that we ran. And this was for our contact centres. And at the start of the project, their numbers were very close to our 20-50-30 model. They were very close. So it was probably like 18, 48, 50, something like that. But they were very close to 20-50-30. By targeting their training and any other interventions that were required, coaching conversations happened, training happened, links to learning were provided so that individuals could take autonomy and take responsibility for their own learning. So it worked very well. When we reassessed them later down the line, probably about 6 months later, actually, you could see evidence that, whatever we were doing or whatever this organisation was doing in terms of interventions was actually working. They improved from 20% understanding to 61%, dropped the misunderstanding, the knowledge gaps down to 34%. But more crucially, the risk group, the risk categories was reduced to less than 5% risk. So there was clear evidence for the ROI and return on investment for this particular approach to link to individuals learning and justify the spend and the time on resource. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Vanessa now, because we've developed a number of different assessments in this space, and she will be better placed to explain to you what we did and why.
Thank you, Amanda. How interesting, and how concerning is that 30%, isn't it? And the importance to be able to identify those individuals that appear confident, but there might be some underlying training needs that aren't apparent to be able to mitigate against conduct risk and prevent things from happening. So yeah, thank you for that. As Amanda said, we've developed this tool thinking about paraplanners and advisors, but we haven't developed a one-size-fits-all. So we really worked closely with our PFS examiners, SMEs, who are also practitioners, to help us develop those scenarios and the questions aligned with the key behaviours that drive good outcome that my research underpins. So we can go all the way back to the start of the presentation where I talk about the behaviours that drive good outcomes. Then we sat down with examiners who are also practitioners and leading firms to develop those questions and refine them. And then we piloted the tool with a couple of firms to get that validation. And as I said, it's not one size fits all. There are 8 different bespoke assessments, 4 for paraplanners, 4 for advisors or trainee advisors, and they cover these would be the typical roles that would be covered. So in a kind of a level 1, a trainee advisor or a paraplanner, the assessment here takes around 15 minutes. Level 2, we would have a junior advisor who is already qualified to practice, or a paraplanner. This would take 20 minutes. Then we would have an experienced or senior advisor or paraplanner, 35 minutes. And then senior manager or business owner would be the top level, level 4. And that is a bit longer and would take 40 minutes. And also the roles that cover kind of senior advisor, paraplanner, or senior manager, business owner would be the typical roles of a chartered individual that has a level 6 qualification as a minimum. So these are kind of another differentiator of the tool in terms of the fact that it's got 8 bespoke assessments for different roles and different levels of seniority, and we develop the assessments with input from market experts, our PFS examiners. So in terms of benefits for firms, there's also benefits for individuals. Obviously, as Amanda spoke before, an individual would take an assessment and get an individual personalised report that would help the individual plan their development and get an insight really around their strengths, their weaknesses, and their unknown weaknesses potentially as well. But for firms, the first and foremost would be to manage behavioural risk, the conduct risk, to be able to identify those priority areas that require targeted training as a priority, those dark red areas of misplaced confidence, and be able to put in place mitigation training activities to address those, to avoid harm from happening, to prevent harm from happening. Also to evidence compliance. So this is where the tool is really, really useful for those board reports. You've got your training and competence records, but this really focuses on the behaviours and link it back to those expectations of the FCA around the shifting culture and behaviours, and how culture is very much made of the behaviours of individuals operating at all levels. And lastly, to be able to demonstrate or have a bit more kind of an evidence-based approach to make decisions around where you're going to invest your learning and development interventions. So very much to demonstrate the ROI and quantify training effectiveness. It is expected that this would be an exercise that is done today, and maybe your L&D or HR teams design some training interventions, and in a year's time or 18 months' time, you do the exercise again, and hopefully you can then demonstrate whether the needle has shifted in the right direction in terms of those areas that require training. So it really provides that kind of evidence base to make decisions around where you invest your money and your learning interventions. And then just as a reminder, some of the sources of information that the FCA accepts to include in the duty reports, the Consumer Duty Board reports. So we've got internal MI and external market research, but they still very much talks or speaks to the internal MI around training and competence records. And this is also an area where Cognisco has a wealth of expertise working with other regulated sectors, right, Amanda, in terms of how other regulated sectors also use the outputs of your tool to be able to demonstrate compliance to the relevant regulator. And then I just wanted to bring to life some of the feedback that we got from firms that have used the tool. So the first one says the confidence scale was the first time that I saw this, and it made me self-reflect. So this comes from someone that actually took the assessment, and it wasn't. They were saying that it wasn't just going through the motions of a multiple choice questionnaire. It really made them stop, take stock, reflect. Why am I sure? Am I not sure? So it provided kind of that kind of additional kind of self-reflective experience that sometimes we're not, we're not naturally inclined to do. Another one talk about the scenarios that were relevant and relatable to real world scenarios. So they really provide that secure space to make decisions as to how you would act if this was a real case scenario. And this was very much driven by the fact that we worked closely with market practitioners to develop those work scenarios. And then from a training manager point of view, I do see the value in using the insights to understand where training is needed and see it as a valuable form from an organizational perspective. So linking to that return on investment and using data and evidence to be able to plan your training interventions. So that's in terms of feedback to wrap up. And then just to finalize, if you wanted to find out more, you can go to the PFS website, pfs.org/proficiency plus. So there's some more information there, and there's a link to an online demo. But if you wanted to access a full demo, please get in touch with business.inquiries@cii.co.uk, and the team will be able to help you there. And information about Cognisco, obviously, cognisco.com, so you can find out more about Cognisco there. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, we have a page on our site that's dedicated to this, and you can access some sample questions from there. But as Vanessa said, we're open to a free trial for a small group of people. If anyone's interested, please get in touch through that link you can see there for CII. Happy to help bring it to life. I think it's only when you see your own data that you really get the full value of what this can give you. I liked your feedback slide there, Vanessa, because it kind of it speaks to some of the feedback that we've had over the years as well, particularly from managers where they've said, actually it made me think about, they thought they knew how to manage people, but some of the topics that we introduced them to and some of the scenarios, they said afterwards, it made me think about things in a different way. Mm-hmm. It reminded me what I need to focus on. It reminded me of the things I need to think of that perhaps I don't think of every day because I'm BAU, I'm getting on with my job, but actually there are things that you might want to check in on. Are you doing the right thing by your people as well? So it's not until you're reminded.
It's a different angle, different perspective, different way of looking at things, and different way of assessing behaviors, which is tricky, as I hear many times from speaking with L&D professionals. How do you demonstrate behaviors? How do we know? Great stuff. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's any questions. You can find the slides in the links associated with the event, together with the sample reports from an individual and a corporate point of view. Anything else, you can find me on LinkedIn, and Amanda as well is on LinkedIn. So thank you so much.